The CNBC app. Global market news in one place. Customizable sections and personalized alerts. Stocks tracking, interactive charts and market insights all in your hands. Stay connected. Stay informed. Download the CNBC app today.
Welcome to Squawk Box Europe. I'm Karen Cho with Ben Boulos and Ritika Gupta at Downing Street. These are your headlines.
Keir Starmer's leadership teeters on the edge, with more than 70 MPs calling for the Prime Minister to resign. London Mayor Sadiq Khan tells me change is needed, but a new Prime Minister is not the answer.
We are going to be a bit careful about calling for change in the Prime Minister. I'm not calling for a change in the Prime Minister, but I am calling for a change in pace of delivery.
Donald Trump rejects Iran's response to his peace proposal, describing Tehran's demands as garbage and dampening hopes for a lasting ceasefire deal.
I didn't even finish reading it. I said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support.
Fears of an impasse in the Middle East see European futures called well into the red this morning, and Wall Street around the flat line as attention turns to today's US inflation print, the last of Jerome Powell's tenure as chair of the Fed.
Keir Starmer's position as UK Prime Minister rests on a knife edge this morning. Ministerial aides resigned from Starmer's government, and more than 70 of his own MPs told him to quit in a day full of political drama, with the PM's make-or-break speech yesterday morning failing to quell a growing rebellion. Today's crunch point, Starmer is expected to hold a cabinet meeting this morning amid reports that cabinet ministers, including Home Secretary Sabana Mahmood, have told him to lay out a plan to leave Number 10. The Huffington Post reporting in the last few hours that the Prime Minister will be urged to go gracefully or face a wave of ministerial resignations. All this just a day before the King's speech, where King Charles will set out the government's agenda for the reopening of Parliament. A look at gilt yields, which rose along with the number of MPs calling on Starmer to go, with the 10-year back above the 5% handle, as you can see where it's perched this morning. And the yield on 30-year paper up as much as 11 basis points on the day, testing last week's generational high, 5.67%. Well, let's get out to Ritika for more. Ritika, we know it was a huge amount of emphasis on the speech yesterday. It didn't carry Starmer to the position he wanted to be in. Just walk us through what happens from here.
Yeah, Karen, it's deemed that it wasn't bold enough, really, to quell a lot of the tension that has been building up here. The mood over here in 10 Downing Street, it has been tense as there have been more pressure building on the Prime Minister over his leadership after those bruising local election results. Now, the latest news here is that Keir Starmer is going to be holding his weekly cabinet meeting at 9:30 a.m., where it's reported that he is going to be urged to go gracefully or face several ministers quitting to try to force his hand, with even reports that the Home Secretary Sabana Mahmood is telling the Prime Minister to lay out a departure timetable behind the scenes. Publicly, we've already seen that more than 70 MPs have already threatened to resign over the Prime Minister so that he resigns. Now, this comes, of course, after Starmer's make-or-break speech yesterday, where he vowed to face up to the big challenges facing the UK. The issue, though, Karen, was that they didn't announce many new policies, and it fell flat for those who wanted to hear some big changes being announced. And one of those was the London Mayor Sadiq Khan, who I spoke to in an interview yesterday. Now, he isn't calling for a leadership change, but he says that he wants to see Keir Starmer be bolder and braver, particularly when it comes to announcing new policies, such as having closer ties with the EU. Now, he said that the party should set out a pledge to rejoin the EU in the next general election. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Those of us who are members of the Labour Party have got to acknowledge and recognise how bad the results were last Thursday. This is more than a shellacking that we talk about in politics. This was a rejection of all the things that the Labour government's done. Some of them are really good and we should be really proud of, from supporting renters to supporting workers to supporting parents with children. Some of these achievements have been overshadowed by basic mistakes and mishaps. You know, we're talking about Peter Mandelson for the last 6 weeks rather than some of the Labour government's policies. But when I speak to people across the globe, whether they're investors, chief executives, venture capitalists or others, they look to the UK as somewhere that provides calm, stability and certainty. Compare us to other countries. I don't want to name them because I don't embarrass friends in other countries. And so I think we are going to be a bit careful about calling for change in the Prime Minister. I'm not calling for a change in the Prime Minister, but I am calling for a change in pace of delivery. I'm calling for a change in how we storytell, in the policies we deliver. I think we should be much closer to the European Union. I want us to rejoin the Customs Union and the single market. I think it's really important to acknowledge what people across the country are saying, which is they want to see change, positive change, much quicker.
And you called there for bolder policies, including rejoining the EU. Do you think that Starmer needs to go big now instead of waiting for the next general election, even if that does mean breaking certain manifesto pledges, or else maybe it will be too little too late?
I think you've articulated the challenge and conundrum this government faces, which is, I think things have changed since July 2024. The manifesto the Labour Party put forward in July 24 was a good one, but there's been big changes. We have a president of the USA who has introduced tariffs. We've got a war taking place in Iran and Ukraine, which is affecting the cost of the fuels we rely upon. Had a big impact on cost of living in this country. So we've got to acknowledge and recognise the headwinds coming from overseas, which is why, in my view, we've got to be bold, we've got to be brave. My experience over the last 10 years is there's no reward without risk. I think what the public don't want is an impression given that a leader is an administrator or a bureaucrat, important though their skills are. They want a change maker. And I think my criticism of my government, it's a Labour government, I'm a Labour mayor, is we've not been bold enough, we've not been brave enough, and I think unless we do so, we're in danger of losing the next general election pretty badly.
And as I mentioned there previously, more than 70 MPs have called for the Prime Minister to step down. Now, the London Mayor Sadiq Khan has again urged caution about replacing Keir Starmer. As we heard there in the start, he was talking about when he speaks to business leaders, when he speaks to venture capitalists, when he speaks to CEOs, that they look for the UK to provide stability. They don't want to see uncertainty. But if you looked at the market reaction yesterday, particularly what we saw in gilt yields, we saw on that 10-year yield rising back above 5%. It is the pressure growing again that we've seen over the past few days over that uncertainty in domestic UK politics of whether there is a leadership change. Will it be somewhere with much looser fiscal policies? And it seems that there's not going to be any stability anytime soon.
Ritika, thank you very much for that. Ben, just a couple of points here. I mean, we heard yesterday that Sir Keir Starmer was saying, look, if there is a leadership contest, it would only bring chaos. Is he right on that? Because if we think back to what happened from the Tories, it feels as though they're almost borrowing the playbook from the Tories, which is not a good thing. We had, 5 Conservative Prime Ministers in a row. It was a series of times where that lectern was rolled out in front of Number 10. There was another farewell speech, another welcome speech. I mean, this just went on, and ultimately it left the Tories in a state of ruins. Could that be where Labour is headed if there is a leadership contest?
Well, I suppose the Prime Minister and his supporters would say it's exactly for that reason that you need continuity and stability and not a change at the top. And I suppose with the current situation, his critics would say you don't have stability, and although the argument goes you don't want to be expending political capital, time and energy on a leadership race when you could be focusing on policies, dealing with an economy that's growing sluggishly, trying to deal with the fiscal situation that's pushed government borrowing costs so high in recent years, the Prime Minister would say actually that's what the time and energy should be focused on. His critics, I suppose, would say that while there are all of these feelings of discontent and mutterings, he is still having to expend political capital, time and energy on shoring up his position and not focusing wholeheartedly on the policies. And they would use that same argument to say that is exactly why you need a change of leadership to have a fresh start, move along. Yes, there might be short-term disruption, but then you shift the focus back onto policy.
I spoke to a leadership expert in recent years, and he was critiquing the former prime ministers of the country and saying effectively they were all lacking one key talent. If you're going to be a great leader, you have to have a vision, you have to be able to carry people with you with that vision and then execute on the plan. He's saying if you look at the past number of leaders, they also lacked one of those. And the message that came through from Sir Keir Starmer yesterday was that he'd just been too timid. He hadn't gone for it. It feels very hard to be able to carry people with you, even if you come up with the vision now, to be able to carry people with you because they've already jumped ship. They've already gone elsewhere. They want a different leader. They want a different plan. So it feels it's very hard for him to carry out those three different points now because he's been too timid in his own admission.
Yeah, I think what's also interesting is that this crunch point was perhaps very well anticipated. There had been long discussions and talk about if Labour suffers heavy losses in the local and municipal elections that happened last week, he could face challenges to his leadership. And so he knew that this was in the wings and this was potentially going to come around the corner because the polls all suggested, as it turned out to be, Labour lost support to the Greens in one direction to the left and then to Reform UK on the right. So it's not come as a surprise. And if you're looking at it politically, tactically, you might think, actually, might he have got on the front foot? Might he have put his stall out more strongly a little earlier on? Well, let's turn our focus to the situation internationally and the Middle East, because the US President Donald Trump said the ceasefire with Iran is, quote, on life support after rejecting Tehran's latest counter-proposal to end the war.
It's unbelievably weak, I would say. I would call it the weakest right now. After reading that piece of garbage they sent us, I didn't even finish reading it. They said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support.
Well, Dan joins us now. Dan, as I understand it, the President also went on to say dismissively he hadn't even bothered to read the full response, the document from Iran. And that sort of rhetoric, it does nothing really to smooth the path for negotiations, does it?
Fair point. And obviously that reply from Iran didn't start well. As a result, the president said he didn't read the full document. And in fact, President Trump made those remarks Monday morning before heading into a Situation Room meeting with his full national security team. The focus of that meeting was whether or not to resume military action against Iran. This is according to Axios, which also reports that President Trump is now leaning towards some form of military action to increase pressure on Tehran and to force concessions on the nuclear file. Now, according to the report, the options on the table include resuming Project Freedom to guide ships through the strait, restarting the bombing campaign, or even a special forces operation to secure Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. Now, Trump is reportedly hesitant on that last option given the risk involved. And of course, it's unlikely the president would order military action before he returns from China on Friday. But nevertheless, this underscores the concern in the White House right now about the trajectory of these negotiations and, of course, the unease that the president has that so far it appears that Iran is unwilling to compromise on those US demands. Meanwhile, the Wall Street Journal also reporting today a major headline. According to the WSJ, the UAE has been conducting military strikes on Iran. The Journal has been citing people familiar with the matter, saying Abu Dhabi's military has carried out attacks on Iranian targets, including a strike on a refinery on Iran's Lavan Island in early April that sparked a fire there and knocked out much of its capacity offline for several months. Of course, the Iranians responded to that strike with a barrage of missiles and drones against the UAE and Kuwait. Now, important to point out here, yes, we're seeing this Wall Street Journal report, but the UAE has not publicly acknowledged the strikes. CNBC has also contacted the Foreign Ministry for comment. Also, for context here, the UAE has previously said that it had a right to respond militarily to hostile acts. And that, of course, comes after we saw the Iranians firing more than 2,800 missiles and drones at the UAE, more than any other country in this conflict, including Israel. And those attacks have had a significant impact on the ground here, including on UAE tourism, key driver of the economy. on air traffic and the airport, and of course on the UAE property market as well. So it seems as if the conflict has really hardened the UAE's resolve to ensure the region maintains peace rather than conflict. But if this report is confirmed, its involvement into this conflict and into this war certainly marks a new era for the country, and of course a new era of its alignment with Washington DC as well. It's back over to you.
Okay, Dan, for the moment, thank you. We'll have more on that later, and plenty as well on the show, including this. President Trump travels to China for a summit with President Xi, bringing C-suite executives from a number of American major companies joining him for the ride. Plus, earnings from German conglomerates Bayer, Uniper and Siemens Energy. We'll have the details for you this hour. And we'll be joined by the CEO of Six to discuss the listing environment in Europe. Don't miss that interview at 7:30 London time.
Executive Decisions is the new podcast from CNBC, where I ask powerful leaders about their decisions that changed everything. I'm Steve Sedgwick. Here's Miss Jo Malone, CBE.
I started that first business of skincare. That's when I knew that I was in charge of my own life. And that's when the entrepreneur really, although I didn't know what the word entrepreneur meant, that's when the entrepreneur really took hold.
That's Executive Decisions with me, Steve Sedgwick. Get it wherever you're listening to this.
President Trump has invited executives from some of the biggest US firms, including Tesla, Apple, BlackRock and Boeing, to join him on his trip to China this week. The summit agenda is expected to cover trade, AI, export controls, as well as the Iran war. Beat Wittmann joins us now, Chairman Porter Advisors. Beat, thank you so much for joining us. You've penned a recent note and you talk about high noon in geopolitics. Why is it such a critical juncture? I mean, it feels like it is. We're getting it from multiple different fronts, but why is it so crucial at the moment?
Well, we have a couple of big conflicts. One, of course, almost forgotten for the time being in Ukraine with Russia, pitting also the US a bit against Europe, of course. And then we have this war of choice in Iran, which holds sway over the economy because of the oil price. And then we have a whole host of events upcoming, the China summit, then the G7 summit, the NATO summit, the football championship, and all these type of things. So it's getting really high noon in many ways, and markets are, risk assets are rising, and I think the immediate outlook is still very positive because the market just looks through all that noise.
A huge amount of concentration risk is what we're seeing, but we're also witnessing defence stocks not being carried forward, and that is surprising when you've still got two active conflicts, let alone all the rest that could be around the corner. That if you look at the three major German defence names, Rheinmetall, Renk and Hensoldt, they've all been drifting over the course of this year and over the course of this conflict. What is happening with those names?
Well, I have a very simple and clear answer. We have been very positive on that sector and defined it as the major investment themes for the decade more than 3 years ago. So all these stocks simply went up 5 times. And now, of course, that it's very obvious to everyone that we are in rearmament cycle and in a tech transformation cycle. Of course, a lot of that news is right now priced in, and people took profits. That's it. The trajectory, the underlying growth trajectory is very, very positive for this sector. And I think the next 3 to 5 years, it will be the dominating sector performance-wise.
That is fascinating because if we think about where investors now place their bets, the concentration risk that I was mentioning was at 10 US stocks now accounting for about a third of the overall market's value. It gets extreme too when you borrow down to other markets like South Korea and Taiwan, where you have a couple of single stocks also accounting for large swings. Samsung, I believe, were 20% of the market there. TSMC, 40% of the Taiwan market. Extraordinary numbers.
Right. I expect these trends to continue. We see huge concentration risk in the US, and I think we'll go into a fiscal expansion. I think oil prices will be significantly lower the next 2-3 months because the Iran crisis will not be over for good, but it will just back off, and the US will pull out, and that's of course really a boost to risk assets, and everything which is defense, sophisticated industry and technology, that's one complex, is performing very well. That's also why a market like South Korea performed more than 50% last year. It's a technology bit of it.
I know from your observation that you say global equities remain the asset of choice into the second half of this year. And I just wonder, against the backdrop of the ongoing geopolitical uncertainty, the murky situation around trade tariffs that's still in the courts and unresolved, I wonder if it's the same feeling you have that Gamma Road Capital Partners Chief Investment Officer Jordan Rizzuto told our colleagues in the US that we're now in a show me sort of attitude in the markets where investors don't want to react to risks unless they see it has materially disrupted economic or corporate fundamentals, and so far they have not seen that disruption in the numbers.
Well, show me, that's right, but when you look at the US corporate earnings season, that has been positive and above consensus. The restructuring, repositioning and revaluation of European risk assets is a trend that has been in place for 3 years and will be accelerated. So that's all positive. And as I said, we will have oil prices that will significantly decline because of the demand destruction and now the easing of the Strait of Hormuz crisis. And then there are midterm elections, and the Trump administration will do whatever it takes in terms of fiscal gifts to the population, easing of regulation in the financial sector, in the energy sector. That's all boosting equity markets. So I think we'll see the 50,000 and the 30,000s, and then there's a lot of retail money going into the market, and I think these trends prevail now. The negative scenario, however, there is no tail risk priced into the market. If the Iran crisis doesn't stop, if Trump doesn't blink, then of course we have a stagflation risk, and then markets will catch up with the reality, but that's not my base case.
The thing I want to get your thoughts on as well is the divergence that I note. When we do an update for our viewers on the markets, the phrase fresh intraday high, fresh closing high, used in relation to markets in Asia and certainly the markets in the US. I can't recall using that phrase for the European markets. Do you think that's because fundamentally European equities are less attractive, they're in a slower speed lane, and so they're less appealing? Or, are they treading more cautiously and could potentially provide a hedge if people are worried about going into the equities in markets that are already very elevated?
Well, European markets are under-owned, US markets are over-owned. In 24 and 25, European markets in euros have massively outperformed the US market. And the European defense industrial complex has massively outperformed the Magnificent Seven in the US in 24-25. And now we have a breather here because, of course, Europe suffers under the oil prices. Asia much more, but then Europe as well, US a bit less. So this is a opportunity here, a rough spot for repositioning. And you see it in the banking consolidation discussion right now. In defense, you see also then with NATO the confrontation, troop reductions of the US, which makes sense basically. And Europeans have to step up, and they will step up. And that's a very positive multiplier effect in terms of growth when you invest in critical infrastructure, in transportation, in communication, in energy transition. There's always a flip side to everything. High oil prices, produce demand destruction, and they push, of course, alternative energies, which is structurally very positive.
But I just want to revisit the comment you made about the US pulling out when it comes to Iran, because we've got to this morning, as we see the wash up from Trump's comments yesterday, that the ceasefire is on life support. Massive life support was the terminology he used. We heard yesterday the location of a US submarine that can launch nuclear missiles. It's located off the coast of Gibraltar. It feels as though Trump is agitating to get something done. But is there a scenario where he just does this taco, where he just walks away?
Well, my view has always been, and that's largely like that, to attack Iran militarily and to think that this is a winnable thing, or you invade it. That's completely unrealistic, and therefore, if the Trump administration really doubles down on this, then the losses will also be doubled down for the US. And I don't see that. I think he walks away and claims victory, and there are lots of ways to do this. The Chinese certainly will try to influence the situation a bit.
Do you think the Chinese will get involved? Do you think the Chinese will get involved? Because we didn't see the involvement when it came to Russia and Ukraine.
No, they will not be physically involved. They run a long-term economic strategy, and they hold pretty strong cards, to use Trump's language.
But do they use them? To your point around the soft power, do they actually use any of them?
They have an interest, of course, to have smooth trades, and they play right now the good citizens in terms of global rules, multilateralism and all that. So, I mean, it's the irony of the situation. They play the soft power cards basically right now. I don't expect them to intervene in any hard power way in this situation. Why should they? There's nothing to be win, and they have pretty well diversified in terms of energy supply.